The Institute of Extraterrestrial Cultures kept a tight schedule. Boa arrived at Spore's workshop not only on the right day, but at roughly the right time. Considering that the average timepiece didn't cross into the zone without throwing a tantrum, this was impressive. He struck a pose in his mud-stained spacesuit and said, "I got you the job." "And Rho?" I asked. "And Rho. Had to make a compromise though. You won't get paid." "Doesn't matter. When do we leave?" "When I've had time to hit the stools. Need a break. It's a long walk from the new fence they put up. It's prettier though. Hey, I saw your car." "Seriously, you actually went there?" "Since you asked. Come on man, I'm an honest working man. You pay, you get me for the day." "And?" "And the spacesuit stays on." "About the car?" "It's on top of a tree now." "Ah. Yes, healthy looking. E.T. wanted a closer look at your handiwork, eh?" "I'm actually pretty happy with that. Yosefka will put in a good word for me." "What?" "Don't worry, this guy's a little crazy," Rho interjected. A catch-all phrase to whip out in any zone talk. We bantered about Rho's ignorance of the vehicular world, then Boa dismissed himself for some paid leave in the bar. "The wish granter will wait for you," he mocked. "And the Institute?" Rho asked. "Fuck the Institute, and fuck E.T. while we're at it," Boa declared as he thumped off. Spore looked up from his table, sighed, then returned to his sewing. Clear Sky had new members to uniform, thanks to the Institute we were cursing. Money was pouring in on account of an incredible discovery. It was the kind of discovery that needed meat with guns to even get close to it, this being the zone. That's where Clear Sky came in, unofficially. We were all outlaws to be killed on sight, remember? Rho and I had a fatter role to play, alongside Bossman Boa, and if we succeeded, the wish granter would be that much closer. That's what Boa's wild rumors made it sound like, at least. He was usually a reliable guy. Finally a chance to get back on track. First thing was getting to the job site, a few miles north at the edge of the industrial belt. It was past Agroprom, further into the zone than anyone from Clear Sky wanted to venture these days. No one had dared go that way for months because of the enduring army blockade. It had spilled over into the northern reaches of the swamp now too. Only Sidorovich's stalkers went past the train line, smuggling food during the night. Sometimes they came back with pockets full of rubles, or artifacts to fence, or the personal effects of the last guy who tried to make the run. The military was losing good business, and the zone was losing good stalkers. The veterans pined for the old zone, and the new guys wanted more pay than ever. The government was strangling out the little guys. The stuffed-up forces of the world were nervous, and the tall talk was that the last age of the zone was upon us. Fanciful, as if killing all of us would stop E.T. doing whatever they wanted, whether we scrape up their crumbs or not. Forget all that. One last job and our miserable employment would be over. In the squalid bunkhouse I pulled on my heavy flak jacket, pockets bulging with supplies. Sidorovich, as promised, had found us and been forced to pay out his bloody contract. In the two large breast pouches were my eye and my bubble. Rho hated these things. I hated them too, especially when they squirmed. "If you can feel it, you're still alive, so say thanks to 'em," Champ had advised on our fishing trip. I said it as quietly as I could, but Rho still heard and got mad at me. It took a few hours to finally get out. We sped it up by pretending we were coming back, skipping some goodbyes. We had to hike around the old village in the swamp's middle. Government had decided to pay their snipers enough that we couldn't outbid them. Therefore, much of the swamp was off limits. Still, we knew the way. Boa wouldn't have lasted a minute without us, since the swamp had reconfigured twice since he was last here. He needed a PC to update his fancy digital map, and hence plain old stalker wisdom prevailed again. Getting close to Agroprom was the easy part. We crossed the final field and looked down upon the bowl of greenery it sat in. There were two large complexes here, the Agroprom Research Institute to our left, and the factory that built it behind the familiar ridges to our right. The army had the former locked down, on account of the shady business the whole place had conducted. Pick your favourite rumour, you could find a tale for anything. The old staff had long since been rolled into Boa's gang, and if they had any sense, they'd left before the zone swallowed the whole place up. The secrets left behind were enough to justify bringing out the MI-24 to patrol. It grazed around the irradiated hillsides that surrounded the place. It was too low, one roaming alien or disgruntled marksman away from disaster, and those were common enough. I speculated that their IR search camera must be busted. "This is the part where we get shot," Boa noted. "Or we go at night. Good bushes here for passing time," I said. I felt like a real stalker getting to say something like that. Boa disagreed. "Institute doesn't pay for nights, not gonna risk it." "Do they pay you for getting shot?" "For taking the bullet out, sure." "Good people they are." "They just want what's best for the world. You, me, and them, dead." "A drink to that," Rho cheered. It was only water. We rested, snacked, and watched the MI-24 burning fuel. Waste of precious taxpayer money. Like we even cared about their dirty secrets. This is the zone. We needed to bypass the base's outer walls and make contact with Boa's co-workers at the abandoned factory. That meant climbing over a few of the debris piles that had concerned me the first time we stumbled across the place. It would be pure luck as to whether a sniper from the research buildings was looking. I couldn't see much of what was through the windows, although many soldiers were guarding the towers and road entrance. Then the Geiger counters crackled, a little creak. Boa grabbed his echo detector and threw it on the ground. It let out a shrill cry. "Something's changing," he said, right on cue to match an explosion of pink in the northern sky. An emission. Someone was in the power plant. The zone knew it was what we wanted too. It could be that this outburst was in our favour. The echo detector shrieked, and we got a radio signal from Clear Sky HQ, the emergency pulse pattern. "You can't be serious! You guys are fucking cursed!" Boa coughed out. We were running before we knew it, full pelt down towards the road. There was only one place to go, the factory. We must have been seen immediately, with everyone roused from their stupors. As we began scrambling up the piles of spoil and rubble in our path, the Yak B rasped. It sounded like one of the barrels was out of shape, creating more of a fluctuating whir than the mint-condition hum. That might explain why the splash area was 20 meters wide, and why we lived for the 4 seconds required to dive down the other side of the mound. The factory was ahead, across a field of timeless trees. "Fucking suit was supposed to block IR!" Boa was screaming. I told him they weren't using IR, didn't I? Rho suggested we follow the green man's lead and sprint. We got about a third of the way to the factory wall before the chopper swung around above us. The ground was shaking as the zone got ready to sneeze. Somehow my legs stayed vertical. The MI-24 started spraying its gun in arcs around the place, not aimed at anyone in particular, I guess. The trees got the worst of it. That brain-dead pilot was probably keeping half an eye on the pink maelstrom above the power plant, blooming up on the horizon like a time-lapse of some rainforest fungus. A beautiful sight, just like the massive steel doors on the side of the factory. I ran harder than I'd ran in weeks. The doors were bolted open, and at least 20 sufficiently illegal-looking guys were standing inside. These hills were crawling with rats, now packed in like it was mating season. Sorry, these were Rho's analogies. I personally wasn't paying attention to any of it, with breathing and checking for bullet holes topping my docket. The factory had no machines left, not even something good to sit on. The doors went floor to ceiling, 5 meters high. Rusted in place, but we didn't need to close them. We were inside, by alien standards. The headaches were gone before they really got started. As for the guys we had surprised, our contacts were bundled up with them. A couple of really grumpy Clear Sky guys from the north, who'd been in there for months, one for 3 whole years. These old members didn't really work with Cold and his clan anymore, after a falling out and a bloody altercation with the aliens at the power plant, an impossible story to get told straight. The survivors who still cared at all about the grand intellectual mission now ran errands for the IEC, same as us. and they hated every sober moment of it. Therefore, this disaster worked out well. The zone gifts us these moments. The Mi-24 hovered above the factory for a few minutes. Being inside the helicopter was safe for the pilot, safer than being inside actually, since the quakes couldn't smash a vodka bottle over your head. Rho thought E.T. felt kinship with pilots, flyers. Conversely, I agreed with the Institute of Extraterrestrial Cultures. E.T. didn't have such a thing as kinship. The stalkers were considering collectively shooting the chopper as a sort of prank. The Clear Sky grumps talked them out of it. The chopper drifted off elsewhere, and we were left to receive congratulations for running the blockade. The stalkers used the factory as a base for their smuggling, the lifeblood of the inner zone these days. The army weren't crazy enough to take the factory door by door, so contented themselves to siege it from the air when they felt like doing their job. Sidorovich was making more smuggling food with these guys than the average wannabe could hope to earn fencing a magic rock. But that was good for us. It meant that there was stuff deeper into the zone worth staying for, no matter the rent. We had weeks of food in Boa's stupidly large backpack. A magic rock of peculiar properties was stitched into the base to provide an anti-gravity effect. The zone is kind. We got the various gossips on the current routes we should use to head north from here. The aliens weren't very active in the vicinity of the factory, drawn instead to the big action Boa wanted us to cash in on at the end of our trip. The emission balled itself out, and the moment we got a safety pulse from Clear Sky, half the stalkers ran off to get a free shot back towards the swamp or the loner villages. I wondered how that ET in the tunnel under the railway was getting on these days. Plenty of tourists to hustle for tasty thoughts. That was Boa and Rho's theory on what they were doing in there. I was happy to just carry the gun. The next leg was easy, being outside the army's patrol radius. From north of Agroprom it was pure stalker territory, packed with things that made you pine for the days when getting through screaming barrages of Yak B shells was the worst part of your commute. We ended up slopping along a muddy trail beside a nearly dry reservoir. The local pig and flesh mutants were orbiting the watering hole and left us alone. They would be high as a kite on the psychic after effects of the emission for at least a day, making it a good time to hunt them. Flesh tasted okay, and the ones that looked like dogs or cats were usually easy to cook with. There was no time to stop and pretend this was a camping trip. Boa was getting beeped by his employers. He had picked up their radio signal. He said there was trouble, wasting his breath. We jogged about a mile across open fields to reach Lake Yantar, and heard the trouble before we crested a ridge and saw it. There, beside what remained of the lake, was a steel compound that looked like it was built by E.T. It was called Big Blin, a saucer-shaped lab covered on all sides by high walls, padded with grey airdrop containers. Government stalkers. Practically a paradox. The whole thing had been built from above in recent months, giving an unlucky band of scientists a chance to taste the zone in person. There was gunfire everywhere. It couldn't be said where any particular crack or boom was coming from. Muzzle flashes from the gaps in the Blin's outer wall were the good guys. The flashes coming from the swampy lake to the left, a road of wrecked vehicles to the right, and the massive brown brick Yantar metalworks beyond the Blin, those were different guys. "What the fuck were the idiots doing here?" Boa asked. He was talking into the radio, I think, although Rho answered, "Getting turned into zombies. Must have been deliberate." I could see where they were coming from. There were approximately 100 zombies closing on the Blin from 3 sides, shambling and shooting. There was no way so many stalkers were caught in the open, with shelter all over the place around here. Well, I did say that this was the location of a remarkable discovery, and as Boa debated how to get down into the compound, it discovered us right back. A blue light flashed, and after the squinting passed, something electrical was hanging in the air above the dead metalworks. "You see, this place is something else," Boa said. He then reported that his radio had broken. The shooting had stopped. The zombies were pouring at themselves on the ground, or otherwise doing something I couldn't make out through the binoculars. Human shouts echoed from the compound. "What did it say to you?" Rho asked. "What?" was my reply. You couldn't hear it, could you? Rho said, completely serious. Rho, don't worry. It's the miracle machine we talked about. It can't hurt you, Boa explained. How do you know that? Boa had a decent excuse to not answer, since we needed to move while things were quiet. He brandished that storied tinned Makarov and followed me. I cradled my adopted AN-94. The blue ball of calm lightning sat there above the buildings, sometimes zapping from one point to another. I felt light-headed when I looked at it. Rho was whispering something they didn't want me to hear. It wasn't as bad as that tunnel, and it stopped when we got to the compound, shooting a couple of pale zombies crawling around on our way. The place was manned by 30-some soldiers in various get-ups, complaining that their electronics were frazzled. A couple recognized Boa and let us in without too much friction. The crew here ranged from space-suited science meat to exoskeletoned tank men with weapons straight out of NATO's Lost and Found. A team in Navy uniforms was prepping to go out and execute more zombies. They had patches on their shoulders with black cats and some English text. Foreign mercenaries. IEC had money all right. Was that you? Get them in here! An electronic voice shouted. It came from a megaphone on the roof of the Blinn. Boa was being hassled for food by stalkers crawling out from the containers lining the walls. Feeding time at the human shelter. He directed us to go to the massive door on the other side of the Blinn. It had one of those rotating locks, like on a submarine, and we saw why once we got in. It had a tiny cupboard that acted like an airlock. Something sprayed us with a cold mist from the ceiling. Then the next door thwacked itself open with a rush of air. Inside it was still hard to believe we weren't in an alien spaceship. A couple of faceless guys in spacesuits sat in an undecorated circular hallway. A few unlit rooms had their doors ajar. The rest were sealed up, airtight, perhaps zone-tight. It is Mr. Z and Rho. Of course Rho as well, an old man in white said as he appeared from behind a glass door to the Blinn's center. The room behind him had loads of pieces of dead mutant, with a couple gently glowing after the light flicked off. You showed yourself in very nicely. Can you control that power? He asked. He was disappointed to hear how little we could claim. That the zone reacts to you it can't be. He seemed to be talking to himself. He showed us to a cell with a camp bed to sit down on, then left without saying anything else. We heard him invoke God a few times in the room next door. Then I heard that airlock door screeching open, and loads of people piled in. I don't want to talk to them, Rho said. I was about to close the door to our little room when the old man returned. You are certain you are not controlling it? He demanded of us. I wasn't certain, although claimed otherwise. It was another emission, he said, and before long, the shakes and the yellow flashes through the tiny glass porthole confirmed it. There has never, ever been two in one day, he said to us. He excitedly brought over some other guys to greet us, including Boa, with his space helmet off. He was a handsome guy, I thought. Didn't really need to be here in the steel pancake. The old man was named Sakharov, Professor Sakharov to everyone else, and soon had his team attending to all manner of instruments around the Blinn. This is a really good sign, Zed, Boa said to me. I hope Rho will be okay with whatever the professor thinks up. You know what we want. If we can get it, then fine, I said. I'll work hard, Rho promised. With that, Boa went to do whatever the hell his job was. We were left alone, while the world gently exploded and reformed an unknowable number of times. The scientists ended up disappointed that it turned out the same as ever. The soldiers in the corridors left as soon as they could, cigs and lighters poised for when the professor was out of sight. Sakharov came back to us and sat on the camp bed opposite. It wants you dead, there is no doubt about that. Fear is something we theorize could drive the zone's behavior, he rambled. This is why the visitors recruit and turn stalkers to work for them from behind their veil. You wished to have passage north. Clear Skies expeditions ruined such a thing.
The zone has no north now. You understand the brain scorcher, of course, but one of the masterworks. Here, we have the other, albeit not entirely of alien design. The most fascinating thing indeed. And it knows you're close to beating it, you see.
We didn't see. We needed to sit through the whole lecture. However, the sound of gunfire outside was bugging me. Then the echoing notes of bullets crashing into the blean around us.
I will make sure it's okay,
Sakharov said, tottering out like he was getting us tea, which he never offered, I might add. He assured us the soldiers were dealing with the renewed siege.
It wasn't like this yesterday,
he noted, that menacing refrain.
The miracle machine has been saving its strength. Now it fears you and your wish. It fears your sophistication and your honest purpose so purely. It knows this. Yes, it can only be fear.
I pulled my Browning and pointed at the door. Something was coming through the wall out there. A translucent orange mist in the image of a screaming, clawing human. Didn't need to think about it. I fired twice, each shot prompting a flash of light exactly like what I'd seen when the Mi-24 had tried to shoot through E.T.'s depot back near the cordon. The ghost disappeared with a whoosh. Neither bullet had struck the wall.
There are more of them. Lots more,
Rho told me. What the fuck are those? I asked of Sakharov.
You can see them. Harmless, we believe. Usually the realm of psy-dogs and rats. And I mean no offense by that. The opposite. Such a unique opportunity with young Visitor Rho. At last, the miracle machine can be understood and breached, yes.
That was the end of the games. I used my Browning again to get some answers. Afterwards, I was quivering with excitement. I must relay the lessons of our stint in Clear Sky before more can be said of Yantar. Let's say you wanted to pay a visit to the Chernobyl power plant, ET's landing site. To the north you have the river and the Belarusian quarter of the zone, which is completely stalker-free, they say. What little traversable land the aliens left there has been bombed into a pulp of quick mud. No one has ever met anyone who'd come from that direction, and even before entering the zone we knew there was no action for the living there. North was out. East of the plant is the lake and surrounding marshes, the plant's outlets, packed with enough punch to kill a man wearing 3 inches of lead skin. Rumour has it E.T. is having a dinner party beneath the lake's surface to this very day, and that in the zone's internal weather system, the lake would sometimes evaporate instantaneously to reveal them. It then rained back into place, E.T. unbothered, and anyone who'd dashed in to grab the fantastical mounds of loot down there disappeared forever. East was out. To the west was Pripyat, the town of the Chosen. Every single person with a Pripyat postal address had been taken. No one missed, no one added. That is not to say there aren't people living there now, according to ubiquitous wisdom. Monolith, a name the zone's naturalized citizens gave themselves, a brand new lost civilization, about which all kinds of things were said. Only one thing was agreed upon. They lived side by side with E.T. in the ruins of the town. A lot of Clear Sky had been killed by them at the power plant. They had guns and magic. Rho held them in high esteem through a sort of camaraderie of the alien. So the west was an option, but getting there wasn't. That brings us to the south, the beating heart of the zone, where stalkers stalked, bullets, cash and alien artifacts flowed, with a nub somewhere in the mess where some half-honest desperados were trying to commit a listless reality to printed word. Here, the obstacles to even reaching Pripyat, let alone the plant, filtered out most idiots seeking a wish. First there was duty. Usually they'd rather kill a stalker than let them go disturb the zone's innards. They took joy in it, some spat. They had the industrial belt fortified, using the old military positions from the days of the original zone border, where the aliens had stopped sniffing on their big day. People got past them all the time, and money was always an option. I wasn't worried about those guys. Second was E.T., whose unreal machinations were dense close to the plant, leaving only the narrowest routes for veteran stalkers to crawl through in the darkest corners of the wasteland. One mistake, and you wouldn't be you anymore, even if you managed to cling to this timeline. Clear Sky had done it, and paid the price, as Cold had put it. Third, Monolith patrols. E.T. let them stroll about just fine, in one side of an anti-reality bubble and out the other. They were like duty too, although they wouldn't bury your body after they shot you. In fact, they'd probably leave you alive so they could feed you to the brain scorcher. Yes, that's the fourth obstacle, I suppose. Everyone loved to talk about this thing, and only Cold had actually encountered it and lived to tell the tale. We were still waiting for him to tell it. This was about the sum of our knowledge 3 weeks ago, and it had been a dismal picture. Incredibly, the growing list of those who told us to forget about getting close to the plant weren't bullshitting. It's natural selection. Everyone with a vein of optimism about it was dead by now. Then Boer came by the swamp to look for Champ again, and let slip the goings-on in Yantar. It was Rho who realised there might be something they could do. Rho and the Zone had a very odd relationship. Boer must have exposed Rho's secrets to all manner of academic officials to get us this job. It's not like they could make us leave, so screw the outside world and whatever they thought they knew. What was so special about Yantar? Nothing, until yesterday, as they say. The Institute had 2 reasons for coming here. First, because after the last big emission, the dead rose. And that's not only the humans. North of the metalworks was a modern town named Poliska, and its quaint old counterpart Limansk. They weren't on the maps of the Zone, until yesterday. Someone somewhere was probably looking at their map the moment they appeared, at which point memories resurfaced that yes, those towns had once existed. We don't know where the Zone took them over the last few years, and I suppose there's a man in a too small pullover sitting several stories up in an uncleanable sub-office who believes it is possible to find out, on foot, in the flesh. Thus arose the second reason for the Blin's touchdown in Yantar. Getting any closer to the towns by air made people disappear. There was a lot more to be said here, but this is the only solid point that is certain to be true. Ah yes, as certain as everyone was that Poliska and Limansk never existed. At last I rambled to the point. The miracle machine of X-16. What was that? Well, do you know the brain scorcher? Of course you've heard of it. It's like that. Easy to understand, right? It was something. Everyone knew that, and I knew a little bit more. I knew that it was sending orange, ethereal spectres that seeped through earth and metal right towards me. Rho could sense them, and kept me awake all night telling me what they saw. Armies underground, marching to and fro, sniffing the living above, and swimming with all the might of their sunset vapours to find us. To find me. Rho believed that they were not on the menu, and I didn't want to argue otherwise. I tell you all this in preparation for the waking nightmare of the following day, if awake I truly was. I had one job: undo the sorcery of the miracle machine, and be given a free pass to the Zone's interior, the new section, the section where surely a fresh route to the power plant awaited. I would be among the first, as Sakharov put it. Rho reminded me that we could always kill those ahead of us, and it wouldn't matter once we got our wish. Therefore, I stepped out from the bullet-scratched Blin into the clear morning, almost as excited as I'd been the previous night. I had 10 magazines of bullets, a gas mask, a flashlight, and my artifacts. I did not have Rho. Rho had been replaced by a headpiece of Frankenstein electronics that only fits one, Sakharov's personal invention. "Never take it off!" he warned as the Blin door boomed closed. Rho was at his shoulder with a smile. Already I could feel the pain stirring. The Zone felt it too. I completed a single step before the sky fractured and cried pulses of electric blue. I gripped the headpiece and pulled. It stayed on. I had 10 stalkers of various pedigrees screaming at me to run. I looked up. They were heading out of the compound and towards a tree burning brightly amid a half-fire. Plates of mud tumbled into the air. Clacks of gunfire from far away blended into the crackling of the zone's whipping energy. "When I can't be there, everything you remember about me, that is with you," Rho said, so loudly that everything else was rendered inaudible. "Don't make any mistakes, and you'll learn more than any of these people. Not more than me, though. Get up, then." "This is the man we're sending in," a voice complained. I opened my eyes to find the black glass of Professor Kruglov's helmet practically touching my rubber mask. "He's awake," he noted with open regret. I got up. I was in a concrete tunnel, a pipe, with stalkers lined up in front and behind. The glare from their many flashlights concealed them, apart from when a blue pulse ran through the air right down the tunnel. "That'll be the last one, then," Kruglov informed the rest, and they believed him. I found myself being forcibly moved along the tunnel by the guy behind me, and so I played along and got to walking. "It really doesn't like you, this place," Kruglov chatted. A spectre came up right below my falling foot. Stepping on it blew it up like it was made of dust. It gave me an instant migraine, and again I found my hands were tugging on the metal detritus wrapped around my head. "The phantoms are here," I said. The others didn't know what to do about that. I pushed past them to get to the end of the tunnel first, growing a bouquet of complaints and well-wishes en route. The pipe emerged into the forward camp of the Institute mercenaries, some shipping containers and a fire pit situated in a dried-up pond. It was right beside the main gate into Yantar, which loomed above an embankment with concrete reinforcements. The blue ball in the sky was gone, although the lowest of the clouds still rotated like teacups at a fairground. The sun, or zone equivalent, was shining everywhere but here. The stalkers had some parting barks for me, probably bursting with information. I denied them the pleasure and hiked to the gates without second thought. I simply needed to do the job and get back to Rho. After making sure the stalkers weren't going to follow me, they would die, I slipped around the iron gates. My vision was becoming dull, the tones cool, and my ears began humming. The building I needed to reach was across a train terminus that thronged with movement, either of space-time itself or from the mutant dogs beginning to sit up and notice my arrival. There were crackles of blue light flittering over the surfaces of the buildings, scurrying snakes of lightning, and then red flashes of gunfire from the windows. I leapt behind a truck and listened for the fall of the bullets. They were a quarter second or so behind the flashes, and only one hit the truck in the first volley. It was safe enough to look out with the binoculars. Zombies, dressed in green stalker suits or military equipment. They weren't looking at me. Some started to gradually let the muscle memory of how to reload their weapons take hold. I felt a searing pain at my back. I turned and faced down another humanoid phantom, gruesomely injured. I put 2 bullets through it before its arms fell on me again. There were more behind me, gathering at the gate. Humans, dogs, small rat-like things, and even flesh and bloodsuckers, all working side by side against me. It was hard to tell if they were getting closer. In a way that it's impossible to truly describe, distances were not well defined in the so-called psi field. Whatever the case, moving on was all I had in mind. I turned out and went straight along the road past the train yard. The dogs barked, then decided to take me. 2 shot bursts from the AN-94 put them all down methodically, although it also clued in the zombies. Some of them were now outside the buildings. Ugly, shambling things, pitiful in their struggle to raise their weapons. I put the scope to my eye and tried to knock them down at a distance, outside the effective range of an old AK shot from a rigor-mortised hip, very short. It almost worked. Exchanging fire with the last one I could see, I got hit in the chest and almost fell over. The vest did its job, and the artifacts behind it were unharmed. I thought about reaching for the vodka. That memory of Rho dissuaded me, dutifully. I stumbled on past the tall red bricks and taller lattices of poorly rendered concrete. The road split out into various parts of the complex, but straight ahead the way was narrow and flanked by a guardhouse. Sakharov claimed my destination was in the building to my right. It looked like a Brezhnevka. The doors and windows were covered in brown steel plates. I did a lap of the building to look for a way in, knowing already that it couldn't be that easy. Several phantom dogs, flesh and pigs came through the walls to drive me away. This was as good as confirmation that it was the correct building. The others around it, while bigger and more intact, were too quiet to be the sort of death trap I was looking for. An engine spluttered nearby. A zombie driving an old vulgar staff car with its snub roof torn off came around a corner and crashed into the red wall beside me. My Geiger counter practically vibrated. I agreed with the zone that this was indeed a very interesting at-home customization job. Never liked the roof on the Volgas, practically an offense to the beauty of the Pedeba line it cruelly stole factory space from. I shot the driver through the glass and tapped the magazine. It sounded empty enough for a flip, but as I did so there was a ripple in the air right in front of me, and heat. I was on the floor before I knew it, listening to a familiar growl. A bloodsucker, angry I'd killed its chauffeur perhaps. Its tentacles were wrenching my mask around and blocking the eye holes. Thankfully my hand had fallen at my hip, so bringing out the Browning was quick and easy. I put 13 bullets through whatever was there, and my vision returned. No sign of the bloodsucker, but my jacket was soaked red. The blood trail showed it had retreated only a few meters. I picked up the AN-94, jammed the magazine in, and pulled the trigger. The magazine was the wrong way up. There was a thudding, then the blood pooling below the wounded bloodsucker started being, well, sucked. It was hoovered up while I stared. I was waiting for Rho to hand me another magazine, and waited too long. 4 bloody prints advanced towards me, one trailing blood, the other new. The new one's footprints were about twice the size of the first. I was running a good second or two before I knew it. The magazine was kicked aside by the pursuers, and the AN-94 swung around my neck. My hands brandished the empty Browning. Finally I realized how easy it would be to slip the next magazine in from my belt, and did so. That I was engaged in mortal combat sunk in, and my movements accelerated. "Careful, Rho!" I shouted, disappointing myself. I rounded the corner of the locked building. I was back at the edge of the train yard. There was a ladder to get up onto the fueling pipes and crane gangways crisscrossing the space above it. I went up, using the Browning like a hook in my right hand. I stopped. My leg was pulling me back down. I felt the bloodsuckers scrambling to pull my trouser leg out of my boot, then their tentacles were nailed to my skin. I squealed and got the Browning pointing downwards. I fired all my shots. The tentacles were torn away and the bloodsuckers disappeared. 3 of the bullets had gone through my boot. I sighed as if I'd forgotten to get cinnamon at the grocery store, then pulled myself up to the walkway grates. It was barely wide enough to walk on, and didn't stay completely still either. I heard the circling footsteps of the bloodsuckers, and the bark of more dogs. After a deep breath, I pushed my hand into my vest and pulled out the eye. It was looking all around, fully awake. Ignoring its excited buzz against my hand, and the resumption of the Geiger counter's song, I jammed it against my foot. The pain was eliminated with magical efficiency. It wasn't going to do any good for the boot, though, and this pair had been worth more than a human life in the zone by a growing margin. I could practically smell Sidorovich's cologne, yet I was far from dead thanks to the eye. I asked Rho to help me get my stuff together, then roared at myself in a miserable crash. I loaded the weapons, bandaged my leg, and fished the bullets out of the sole of my boot, stopping twice to fire at the phantoms still drifting from the locked building. They had no trouble swimming up into the air to reach me. The bloodsuckers knew that they were in for a treat, and waited at the closest corner of the building. They would smell when I came back down. I'd been in a few standoffs like this, and ordinarily the artifact at my chest made it worth waiting around. My lost blood would be back within a few minutes. However, I was leaking ammo to keep the phantoms away, and every shot was advertising my position. Then there was the sky. The clouds were starting to gently spin back up. Fleeting streaks of blue were exchanged between the sky and roofs of the buildings. I stood on the walkway, putting a good amount of effort into balancing my hefty load. I decided to throw an empty magazine towards the bloodsuckers to see if they would come out and get shot. Instead, a dog jumped out from behind a skip to pick it up. It wasn't worth the bullets to fire at. I looked up again. The ball was forming, like a hazy cloud to begin with. I think Rho would have told me I had about a minute, so I went with that. I looked to the building and realized there was an option from up on this walkway. The second floor windows were all open, glass long broken. I could have pushed the Volga below to get up to them. 45 seconds to go. There was one way of doing this quickly, but I'd have to drop my pack. I couldn't leave my ammunition or first aid gear. I considered waiting the storm out in the building, then fighting my way back out. Did I have the ammunition on my vest to hold out there for long enough? "Remember, you are human," Rho's voice said. "But don't forget the fish either." They were right. I ripped my tension cord from the side of my backpack and fixed it to the topmost strap. I tied the other end around my waist. The first big blue flash lit up the sky. I almost fell from the walkway. There was no space to build up speed. The bigger bloodsucker was peering around the corner, ready to make the catch. I pulsed back and forth, willing a bigger jump than I thought possible. The hum in the air ramped up to a crescendo, the curtain call. I sprang from the walkway with arms high. It was an impossible jump, really. There was one factor that kept me alive in that moment. The cheap concrete below the window was rotten through with cracks. I slammed into it as I fell short of the window, and it mercifully let my arms through to find the floor behind. I was hanging by my forearms. The bloodsuckers were already moving. The aliens were beginning their incision into my brain. I pulled with more strength than I knew I had, pressing my hands into broken concrete and shards of glass. I got the side of my knee up and gave myself a cut, levering the rest of me up. The bloodsuckers were too dignified to try and climb the wall after me, although given the size of the big one it wasn't out of the question. I put my hands to my head. The device was still there. The psychic pain was being excised, leaving only the rest of the pain. I was in an empty room, beside more empty rooms. I swept around with the Browning and shot 3 phantoms away. That was as far as I could go with the length of my tension line. Hoping I had enough time, the Brownie went back to bed, and I used both hands to reel in my pack. The bloodsuckers wouldn't see it. They were blind in the daylight. The sky was doing its thing. I saw pillars of blue shoot down around the metalworks, perhaps feasting on more zombies. Their crumbs of thought couldn't have been what the aliens wanted. Note that I use the term aliens liberally here, for Sakharov had claimed that this wasn't an alien project. After all, X-16 had been built by the taxpayer a year after E.T. went home. What was X-16? From where I ended up, it was a dark abyss at the bottom of a winding staircase. The stairs in the middle of the building went down much further than the ground floor, the peeling white plaster fading to black, with the odd reflection of brass banister caps revealing that they carried on beyond where most of my light dared venture. Looking at it brought on a shock of nausea, and tears burst from my shaking face. This was the way, all right. The orange mist of phantom life coursed beyond sight. I could hardly breathe. I stepped back to lean against the wall. A stripe of red tiles around the stairwell seemed like a portal to hellish places, into which I merrily hung myself. I took a minute to check over my weapons. I went for my flask. Finding a bullet hole had mostly emptied it. I finished off the water, then threw the flask into the abyss. It rang many times. Then I heard it bounce a few times in quick succession. There was a flaw in the end. Can't guarantee that in the zone. I told myself that the way to Rho, the way home, and away from everything inside and outside of the zone, was down those stairs. I triple-checked that I had a round chambered in the Browning, slipped a rag under my mask to wipe my face off, then shunted myself towards the stair. As I went lower, the world began to fade. Colours drained to white and grey, my footsteps became silent, and when I tapped myself on the head, it was like a knock on a distant door. Here the assault on my brain was commencing in earnest. This was as far as anyone without my metal headgear could go. And even that wouldn't save you if you weren't also best friends with a prodigy like Rho. I was about to test how far such an alliance was going to get me, and if Boa and Sakharov were right about this at all. I reached the final twist of the stair. While my own movements were silent, my ears were shaking with a waterfall of whispers, inaudible in one way, inescapable in another. From the walls emerged hands, phantom limbs, with no colour or sound to them. At first they managed to grab a hold of me, which stung like a blade and left a buzzing afterburn of malfunctioning nerves. My cries didn't sound like they were coming from my mouth, but from something travelling away from me along the hall at the end of the stairs. It led to a serious metal gateway, open. 2 zombies in mil-spec exoskeleton gear guarded the way in, which helped me pull myself together. The AN-94 shook silently in my hands, and down the zombies went. I proceeded into a lobby with bits of wall unfinished. It seemed to be built into a cave. There were stains and bullet casings all over the concrete floor. Old trolleys and busted furniture was strewn about. A single light was on at the other side, hanging over an empty elevator shaft. That was where my cry had been taken. As I crossed, more of the phantom hands were wriggling up through the floor. I took out a few in my way with the Browning. One grew up all the way into a head and body. It was a man wearing a tight gas mask and withered stalking suit. A phantom of such a man, that is. The continuing sting of their touch before had me reflexively shooting at them without thought, and rightly so. At the shaft I needed to descend some ladders, only 3 stories or so, but more of the masked phantoms terrorized me on the final ladder. I fell the last story in my panic to evade their touch. When I hit the ground, the headgear slid back, barely staying on, yet not quite enough. I lived in that moment for a long time. I hesitate to describe what was let into my mind. It is something that requires references to real experiences to get across, of which there are none suitable. It was like someone fiddled with the frequency of the universe and started picking up static, your body, brain and all. There was no emotion or feeling to it. It was something else, in the strongest possible sense of those words. It was something you can't imagine, or it was the sum of everything imaginable. It was the discovery that if you added up the whole range of human emotion, the dread and pain far outweighed the joy, combined with absolute certainty that this could not be changed. Unshakable horror, not for want of shaking. And yet, as I said, there was no emotion to it at all.
"It's all under control, Mr. Z,"
a garbled voice said. That's when I woke up, my hand on the headpiece, and its position across my forehead restored. It lasted no more than a second, given how much closer the phantom on the ladder had got in that time. In my confusion, I threw the Browning at it, which worked. I rolled onto my feet, skidded around the elevator base to check each corner, then breathed. A hail of bullets came through the open doors, one hitting my stomach plate. Back to reality. The room out there was a long hall with a semicircular ceiling. 2 rows of doors ran down the walls, with catwalks giving access to the upper ones. That's where the muzzle flashes danced in the dark. I pushed myself against the side of the door, told my eye to get to work, then immediately realized that standing at all still was going to get me snared by the phantoms. I ran my hand over my pouches. 8 magazines, 1 empty, 1 dropped. Good enough. I switched to the other side of the doorway and blasted a small phantom, a rat thing. The zombies gave me another burst. I estimated that there were 5. There were 8. I pulled the empty magazine and held it in the doorway. They shot at it a few times. Good. Then I tried something similar with my flashlight, before immediately withdrawing it. Couldn't risk it. While searching the ground for a better zombie toy, I noticed one of them had come so far down the catwalk that they had an angle on where I was standing. I couldn't see them at all if I didn't shine the light that way. They had an OTS-14 Groza assault rifle, exceptionally rare, not very good. More importantly, it was empty. I leant my scope over my eye and put 6 bullets into the guy. He was in military armor, but with no helmet. The first 4 barely seemed to faze him, just removing various facial features not essential to a zombie. The other zombies blasted away at me, kindly mowing down a phantom that was rounding the door from the outside. I was not worried about the door or the bullets, but the prospect of what would come through the floor at any second. That helped drive me out to take my chances with the zombies. My plan was that their shooting would have emptied their mags, and they couldn't reload effectively. I was almost right, and almost didn't get shot. I tensed my chest, dropped to my faltering knees, and started picking them all off one by one. By the end it was only me shooting. It was like a fairground stall. I was bleeding from 2 holes along my collarbone and another above the left knee. It hurt less than being touched by those grey fingers. I slumped back and lay there in the near dark, then wiggled my bag out from under me. I knew I didn't have much time, maybe none. I silently unpacked the first aid kit on top of my bag. The bleeding subsided quickly, with the eye wearing away. The bullets would be stuck in me for the time being. I took the heavy-duty injected painkillers. No side effect could be worse than the whirlpool my mind was stuck in already. I wanted to wipe my face again, but I didn't dare slip my mask open. The constant noise was getting to me now, that whoosh of voices, saying everything at once, like a hurricane wind into my ear. "They're coming, quick," Rho whispered. I found myself on my feet. I groaned as I tightened the bandage on my leg. The groan fled down the chamber towards a closed sliding door. That's the way, huh? The rest of the doors led to empty rooms. From scraps of painted messages on the wall, I gathered it was accommodation for the staff and related facilities. All furniture was long gone, leaving only haunted fragments of forgotten sheets to soak up my torch beam. After stumbling between a few such cells, I dragged myself up some metal stairs to get to that catwalk. I sat and cleaned the room of drifting phantoms. My plan was to sit there to avoid any surprises on the floor. I don't know how long I thought I'd be staying there, but I caught myself trying to sleep. Closing my eyes made the sound dull, more bearable. It made everything more bearable. "Even the phantoms want you to carry on," Rho said. "How long has it been?" I asked. "Only a few minutes." "Impossible. It feels like days." "You'll get those days back, I promise." "Thanks. Wait, how? You're not real." "I'm not. I can still hear you. The real me is waiting too. So get up, stalker. Or should I call you bro?" I'm doing it. And I had an idea. The idea was to reach all the way to the bottom of my bag, where the wide glass bottle of Cossacks slumbered. I took a deep breath through the mask, slipped it up with a jolt of nerves, then drank as much as I could. It had absolutely no taste, and felt like a gentle breeze running down my throat. I threw the half-empty bottle at a phantom bloodsucker, cleared my throat with a sound like a distant engine starting, then slid down the stairs. My leg shot some kind of feeling at me that the drugs caught and neutralized. I shuffled to the sliding doors. There was nothing holding them closed, so I rolled them apart and proceeded into a zigzagging hallway with decent lighting. There were pipes coming up from the floor that joined me on my journey. They vibrated against my torn gloves. There were zombies around every corner of the hallway, and each one got a burst to the head before they noticed me peeking out. Likewise, the many masked phantoms emerging from all directions were dispatched with single shots. 6 magazines left, plus some scraps from zombies with 39mm. The walkway ended in a narrow steel stairway up to a series of unassuming doors, one after the other. Security stations. I was stamping harder and harder, trying to hear my footsteps. I thought I could hear my breathing among the psychic hiss, delayed though, like it was being played back to me. Or maybe I was imagining things. Imagine that. The last door in the slalom emerged to a short, rounded tunnel. It was in perfect condition. Notices on the wall bore warnings of all kinds related to heavy machinery, and also a sign that depicted a head wearing something like Sakharov's crown. The inspectorate would be pleased I was taking their regulations seriously. It was quieter, as if the rushing noise had been moved further from my ears. There were shelves of hazard suits and military equipment, vests, helmets, boots. I was in the market. I ended up tying a pair of fresh boots to my pack. I could hear footsteps all around me. none mine. I saw no source. I swung around and thrust at shadows with the butt of my AN-94, achieving nothing but my own humiliation. I clocked that the steps were moving down the tunnel. There was a set of powered double doors, dark and plastered with jargon, invitingly ajar. Moreover, when I walked that way myself, they opened further. I stepped carefully with my weapon raised. Even a glimpse through the doors was enough to know this was it. There was a huge chamber beyond, with columns of white light revealing walkways rising around a grey pillar crawling with pipes. The walkway I was on hung above a pit of wiring, a moat around the column. My skin shuddered, and a pulse of air shot through the chamber. It sounded like a great bell on the far side of a storm. Then I saw someone standing on the stairs up to the next ring of catwalks. 4 flashes, 2 pushes against my shoulder and side. The eye wasn't hungry enough to be excited by it. I got the AN-94 shaking. There were 7 guys in military combat gear stationed at various points, who now took potshots at me whenever I crept forward. They moved like zombies, but their skin was fresh and their equipment well kept. I didn't care about the inconsistency, worrying instead about whether I was dying or whether I could die. I suspect I couldn't, not until I completed my mission. I used banks of 2 old-fashioned computers for cover as I moved up the walkways, blasting and killing keenly. When bullets hit the computers, it didn't even leave a scratch. On some of the monitors, I saw parameters of the chamber were being logged on continuous graphs. Names like Alpha, D, D2, E-rate, all the way to Z margin. The variable labelled experiment hour was at 64,480.4. Sometimes the buttons depressed and pinged back on their own. A better scientist might have learned something from it, if they didn't get shot. I approached the highest part of the walkway, dispatching 2 more soldiers outside an observation deck. The door was open. I slipped in and almost jumped out of my buzzing skin when I saw 20 or so men standing there. Not zombies. They were looking out of the long set of windows, right at the top end of their mighty column. I tried to say something. If I did, I couldn't hear it, not even in my bones. My hand passed through these men as they shuffled about. There was a sound like a church organ, a single long note that travelled in and out of the room. I realised that among the whispers, the men were talking. "They can't come back without us knowing," I heard. "Fresh out of the zone. There's no reason to believe it." I tore up Noonan's paper and mixed it into the solution. I hope the poor thing gets no ideas. Echo sequence, get those damn pencils ready, by God, and write as fast as you can. If it's killing you, write that. I opened my bag and shoved in a load of papers and folders stacked on dining chairs against the back of the room. They were worth 100 times that much paper in rubles, I desperately imagined. The ghosts didn't seem to mind. There was a countdown going on, so I turned to join them in looking at the column at the end. The column shook and the top part opened out like petals. Inside was a layer of glass, with a clear bubbling liquid shimmering under spotlights. The bubbles were pushed up against the glass. I could feel them, the bubbles. It felt like they wanted to shoot across the horizon and never return. "This is the miracle," Rho said. The ghosts screamed and screamed and screamed. Their arms battered me now, and some grabbed onto me, begging for help. It was all I could hear for a few seconds. A couple of them were writing things down in huge, jagged letters. One wrote "lost," then fell over backwards with a gasp of relief. I wrestled the ghosts off me as best I could. They deflated and scraped their nails on the concrete floor. It was over quickly, and the stillness of the dead world flooded back to every corner but the bubbling column. I thought that I needed to kill it. At that moment I saw what was really there in the tank. Any words I use to describe it won't last long, so simply know this. It wasn't an alien, not now, not in the silent world. I said hello. I heard my voice. There was a reply that reconfigured and, I think, destroyed the universe. It was retracted at once. This happened very quickly, and it's something that's hard to remember. I felt continuously alive for each moment of it that I can be sure actually happened. Afterwards, all the whispers and orbiting organ calls were gone. I knew I had to kill it. I could barely feel my wounds as I stood and stared. I felt only that I was there with the miracle machine, together with it, which felt like more than enough company. The bodies around me were surplus. I looked down at the control desk some of the ghosts had been attending. There was a throttle-like lever, marked Accumulator Supply, that was tilted to its forwardmost position. I yanked it to the other extreme. I didn't expect much to happen. Nothing did. Then, while thinking about what to do next, I looked at my hands. I was holding the headgear. I'd taken it off. I looked at the miracle machine, light years distant, and died without further ado. I heard Sakharov's thoughts.
Zig, Mr. Z, your connection to Rho has changed you. Rho is a very special person, and I think the aliens can sense that. Over time you have become more like them. No, you are what they wish they were. Could that be right? It's only a shame that you must now depend on them, if I'm not mistaken. Rho is the external anchor to the world that you need, and for Rho you are a sort of muse, a kindred spirit who knows what is wrong with the world in that unique way. Who better to run away from the past with? And who better to share a wish with? Yes, the Zone sees that sort of thing, I think. It challenges its assumptions. Every emission you cause, every life you claim, every time you take one step closer to their remains at the sarcophagus, that is like a warning pulse to the aliens. A warning that all is not as they thought, that they were wrong, that the universe they don't let us perceive has ways of letting us slip out and away. Yes, away from that dire place. Yes. It's not fear at all. Excitement. Regret and excitement. It won't matter in the end, when they get their wish. Oh, and what poor luck they've had. There must be 1,000,000 Rhos out there, hidden, scared. The aliens are so very wrong about us, and you will show them. You are half of what Rho is, blessed, a living artifact by your connection. Yes, a living artifact. Not a human when exposed to the psi radiation, something else, with new, undefined properties. Both of you. And you especially. It's like you and your precious rifle. The rifle, thanks to you, cannot be harmed, and thus it achieves the changing of time to unpredict the predicted and scar the alien universe. Yes, such as it is for you in the hands of precious Rho. I wonder, can I call them back? Can we use Rho? Use Rho to summon them here with our cricket song? Can we try? What will I need to try? Can we... Please, not so tightly. And so the rhythm of thought ended, and I fell into the astimulus omni nothing. There, rushing to me like a feather on a spring, was my body and world. I was standing before the accumulator supply lever. The room was darker than before. The miracle machine was black, unlit. There was stench and cold and sound. I enjoyed the creak of my armor and the echo of breath in the mask. The walls were painted over with black paint, as were most of the controls. The papers and chairs at the back were gone. No sign of the ghosts or their original hosts. 7 bullet impacts shook the observation room and revealed the missing glass in front of me. I dipped over to the door, brought the AN-94 scope to my eye, and killed a man in heavy armor on the other side of the chamber. It was the only other place with a light on, a ramp upwards to a metal door, the zombie squirming on the floor as its decomposed innards drained through the crack in its head. I was back in the zone. It was hard to remember where else I'd been. Most of Sakharov's headpiece was at my feet, and the rest was nearby. I collected them up and wrapped them together in a bandage. My head was returning, cooling. The holes in my body had closed up nicely, aching badly though. Hearing my breath and footsteps took a moment of getting used to again. I went out and peered down the miracle machine. The liquid at the top was exposed, yet still and empty. It was completely dark at the bottom. Something was making an irregular clanking sound, like a bucket being thrown against a wall.
The passage I'd come through flickered with soft orange light that came and went. I almost shouted something down, then realized how much I wanted to do anything but that. Instead, I crept towards the door with the light. A concrete tunnel rose upwards behind it. The signs on the walls were all gone, or painted over. Still, up is up, and I reasoned that these men of science might have given themselves an emergency exit up there. I wasn't thinking straight, if that even needed to be said. X-16 had been built by the military, the high-up military, the ones who certainly wouldn't have to die inside it. Therefore, this ramp led to a blast door in an otherwise blank corridor that the light from behind me barely reached. It was decrepit. The miracle held sway no more, and Earth's own physics were having their way with our flash-in-the-pan civilization once again. I took a few deep breaths, checked my gear, 4 magazines left, and pushed my hand against the eye. It was wriggling gently. I was alive. Thanks. The door was unsealed, held closed only by its own weight. I strained it open a little. I saw rows of cells and cages on either side of a tiled tunnel. There was an electric light at the far end. I closed the door. I stood for a second, realized I had closed the door I was about to pass through, then opened it again. Someone was standing under that light. I blinked. The door was closed and I was sitting against the wall opposite it. The tiles at my back were warm. I got up, feeling like I'd been asleep. There was no sound from the ramp back to the miracle machine. I decided to try the door one more time, with no expectations. I noticed different things. First, that the floor was covered in human remains, some pooled in tubs sunk into the ground inside the cells, some dripping from the ceiling. Second, Rho was standing an arm's length in front of me. "There's nothing like you," they said. "There's nothing like you. What made you? What called you human? Peace, we can go together." I knew it wasn't Rho, and felt no guilt pulling the trigger. Or when the trigger was pulled, I should say. The Rho in front of me fell to the ground with a familiar stiffness. My empty magazine bounced at their feet. I heard the click of a fresh one being slotted in. The rest of the remains were gone. It was only Rho now. The blood journeyed along the channels between the tiles, showing good spirit and no shortage of determination. Rho's blood. Nothing else could happen. I watched it all the way. The first hint that I was waking from this trance was a pain in my sinuses. This developed into a situation where my mask was torn off, and various things inside me were deposited into the bloody drain in front of me. They flowed away quickly. The drain was broken open, and my flashlight revealed a wide space below it. It was a sewer tunnel. I was jolted awake by the excitement, as the pipe outlets from Yantar's sewers were at the lake beside the Blin. Rho had led me to a secret route. I kicked at the ceramic to make a bigger breach, lowered my bag on the tension cable, then fell down gracelessly next to it. It was completely dry, although banks of silt gave it a certain landscape. There was colour here, and that colour was brown. Glorious brown. I had no bearings, and both directions were barren under the flashlight, or pitch black without. The only light was above me, too high to return to now. I checked the compass. Melted. The 4th compass I'd gotten killed in the zone. I took off my glove and held up a hand, feeling for movement in the air. I was probably imagining it, but I decided that the air was flowing into the hole above me from one direction more than the other, and set off that way. It would have been faster to flip a coin. Rho's job. There were no more phantoms to worry about after the miracle ended, at least. Pressing myself against the side of the tunnel was like jumping into bed. On the other hand, the tunnel was infested with some common zone vermin called snorks. Once human, they galloped at a squat, blind and hungry, suddenly leaping when close to rake at my face with black fingernails. They were smart enough to wrap themselves in torn-up fragments of armor, and here in Yantar, dead soldiers weren't hard for them to come by and repurpose. The first one I encountered only stopped moving after my magazine was 2 shots from empty, and my arms sore from leaping around its slashing lunges and hitting the walls. Remember that soldier all the way back at the cordon who recommended me a gun with more firepower? This is what he meant. After trespassing on the turf of 2 more snorks, RIP, there was a flickering light ahead. I almost sang for joy at the notion of an exit, and it's a good thing I didn't embarrass myself in front of ET like that. Around a bend in the pipe was a floating orange ball. When looked at directly, everything around it appeared to be burning violently. However, looking anywhere nearby, or at the flames, made them disappear. It moved around, patrolling a junction in the pipe where a metal grate barred progress straight ahead. Getting past a situation like this was a stalker's bread and butter. Step 1. Establish what was real. The flames were either real and hidden, or an illusion. A simple test is enough in these scenarios. Rho liked to do it. I needed to get it done quickly. I went back and scooped up bullet casings, stuffing them in my vest. Then all I had to do was flick and follow the casings forward, one by one. They landed gently in front of me as I edged down the side of the tunnel. No signs of being heated at any point. The ball was a liar. I smiled madly. Said ball came around the corner and proceeded past me. It appeared white when close, and inflicted a great longing to escape my body upon me, not only because I appeared to be engulfed in the flames. I believe it wanted me to try and grab it, although it went off on its own without me all the same. It's hard to know what an anomaly wants from the gut feelings they impart, but Rho always got the right answer straight away. You can tell when you're right with anomalies, even if you're dumb old me. Dumb as I was, I made it beyond the affected area and picked up the pace. I was in a short section that turned to the right, then did so again. I saw a speck of white shining on a ladder at the end of a long stretch, hiding behind dunes of silt. I took the first few steps at a run before the silt began to move. What came out was a creature I had heard in the description of other stalkers several times, confirming that what stalkers say is generally bullshit. They called it a giant. Imagine a human head swollen up by some curse of gigantism. Now drop the body. The neck folds behind into a tapering tail, and the earlobes callus over to form makeshift feet that drag the head forwards. You're probably imagining it as something slow and lumbering. It kept up with my sprint, blasting aside the silt mounds and howling with a deep pitch that exploded along the tunnels like it was a blaring wind instrument. If I ran further, I'd have to take my chances with the fireball. I turned, flicked the AN-94 to automatic, and gave the giant everything. It was close enough that I didn't miss at all. Its thick yellow skin rippled with the impact of the bullets, and blood came forth in a pale foam. It barked so loudly that I was pushed over by the percussive force. I slipped out the next magazine while still lying on the floor. It was the last one. When I stood, the giant had its back to me, the back of its head, that is. It was still. I threw the empty magazine past it and got no reaction. I shot its body twice. Nothing. I expected worse. A time for breathing and wishing I had water. The Cossacks would have to do. I swigged it with one hand and gripped the Browning in the other. A few minutes of peace came and went, then it was time to squeeze past the corpse and carry on. I hated that I couldn't see its face. In fact, to see it now, I'd have to be close enough to be licked right into the mouth. It wasn't that big, but could probably take a limb or a head. Would a big head like to eat smaller heads? Rho would know. I diligently inserted 2 loose 39mm into my magazine and reattached it. I threw the rest of my casings at or ahead of the thing, pointlessly. I stepped over its tail, then over its left lobe limb. Something shook. It was my chest. I realized the eye was squirming violently towards the giant. In the second it took me to realize this and stop being spooked out, the damage was done. Or undone. The giant's eyes shunted over to face me. Then I was in the air, held invisibly. I unloaded the AN-94 until the ground touched my feet, only to be bashed by the right lobe. I was back on the ground, saved from death by the pause my blasting had given to the beast. I swam backwards with my heels and elbows while preparing the Browning. Bang, 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 13 bullets in 3 seconds. The last casing blocked the slider open, so the next mag didn't work. Would have been easy to fix if I noticed right away. The giant took one step forward and caught up all the distance I'd put between us.
"It's not after you in this dark,"
Rho said. I drew the flashlight from my vest and shoved it into the silt beside me, still pulling the trigger on the Browning like a moron. A mound had me pushing myself slightly upwards, an incentive to go the whole way and use those feet of mine. New boots soon, eh? I sprinted and hurtled towards the ladder. The shattered glass in the scope of the AN-94 was scattering below my feet with a crunch. I turned back. The giant was standing at the flashlight, looking right at it. I chopped at the slider on the Browning to clear it, chambered the next mag up, and fired with both hands. I rotated the magazines from gun to belt with mindless efficiency. 26 bullets later, I decided that the thing wasn't going to follow. This further shooting was unnecessary in the end, for the light I'd seen earlier was from a misplaced manhole cover that took minimal effort to throw off entirely. Rain came down from a grey sky. The Geiger counter didn't react. A gift. I got out, pulled off my mask and gloves, and rubbed the rain over my face. I knew where I was. The end of the sewer tunnel was nearby, with Lake Yantar's remains beside it. The Blin was visible across it, matching the fog and sky. I looked down at my watch. 6 hours since I'd left. I was surrounded on 3 sides by a razor wire fence, and on the 4th by a blue building with a thin steel ladder on the wall that offered a way up to a concreted-over doorway. I wanted to call to the Blin for them to come get me out. Alas, the IEC wasn't willing to part with a radio on a mission that surely would get it lost or broken in action. It's nice to know one's worth. I fit the manhole cover back into place, climbed up that ladder, then threw my bag over the fence. I used the tension cord to lower it to the floor. Next, I performed the lengthy process of removing my jacket. Sorry, Spore, I ruined your handiwork with this one, although blood red doesn't look so bad. After I got my vest back on over my undershirt, I cut the tension cord to let the bag go, then used what length remained with me to get the jacket on a line. This gave me many attempts to throw the jacket onto the wire, aware that overshooting would probably get it snagged too badly to get it back, so I was being gentle. It was about 2 meters away and below me, less of a jump than I'd made to get into that window earlier, although I wasn't on painkillers then either. Here's my lucky break. I rolled over the jacket with only a little pain, fell into the mud with more pain, and was actually able to pull the jacket off the fence with my cord. Bloody and torn up, it was a trophy of the day. I put my hand on my chest. The eye was wriggling, and the bubble was spinning. I was alive. Thanks. I strapped my mask to my bag, and took a walking shower on the way around the lake to the Blin. The mutants wouldn't dare touch me. I heard some gunfire in the east, nothing worth worrying about. I needed Rho back, and I needed to close my eyes for a while. Hell, I needed to get some bullets out of my body and some antibiotics in, but don't we all? I knew something was wrong quite far from the Blin. No guards were posted. I ended up walking in with the Browning ready to fire, although it wasn't quite that bad. People were inside, milling about in the rain. Clean rain was worth enjoying. I didn't see Rho and started to feel my stomach spin up. I moved straight on, ignoring questions. I rounded the Blin to the front side. The staff were gathered beside the door. I rammed into them and shouted, "Where's Rho?" "Hey, have some respect for the dead," someone said. That was too much. I batted them aside amid their recognition of who I was. They didn't want to touch me, and after conferring, decided to come into the Blin too. They said that they thought Rho was with me. I hated that. The airlock only let in one at a time, so the crowd was locked out. The spray nozzle on the ceiling hissed, but nothing came out. The internal door clanked and delivered me inside. I saw nothing at first. I circled the Blin to Sakarov's office. The lights were on bright, and 2 spacesuits were standing there. The legendary Makarov and a clean Amsel Striker automatic shotgun lay atop the papers on the desk. Boer and Kruglov. "You! What happened in there, Stalker?" Kruglov asked. Boer had the good sense to stay quiet. Sakharov lay on the ground, his neck purple. "Rho, I asked, directing it at Boa. Rho appeared from the yellow door to the bedsit at the back. Rho began, but Kruglov interrupted. You had something to do with this, didn't you? He challenged me. You know where I was, I said. What happened? You're alive, damn the zone. So what happened then? It's hard to say. Why? It's the fucking zone, Professor, I growled, spitting on the floor. Hey, this isn't a church, Stalker. Can we proceed with our operation or not? Was the unfazed response. Find out. What happened to Sakharov? Dead. Murdered, clearly. Just look at him. Oldest man to die in the zone. But still, come on now. No one was here with him, so... Sorry, Zig, we're baffled, truly. I looked at Rho. Rho looked at me, and Boa looked at me looking at Rho. Professor, we'll have to let a few back in, Boa said, to deal with the body. There'll be a lot to report. Standard procedures apply, do they not? They do, Kruglov judged. This led to a lot of business with the rest of the crew in the main section, while Boa, Rho and I went into one of the side compartments to sit down. Some of the others wanted to talk to me, and Boa did a decent job shooing them away. What was it like? Rho asked me. I'll tell you everything. First, what happened? Do you even know? I asked. Rho nodded. Boa sat down with us. You don't blame Rho, right? That's not possible, Boa said. He wouldn't stop talking to me, Rho said. He was conscious, like an alien. He talked to me about all the things that he knew. He said he could see you, referring to me. He said that he knew a way to make the aliens come back. I was scared of him. What do you mean? You're talking about while I was away, you remember this happening to you? I asked carefully. It did happen. He wanted to use his powers on me. He was eating me. Rho was on the verge of weeping. Zig, what's going on? Boa asked me. I held up a hand, then stated to Rho, the miracle machine did this. Rho nodded. You remember killing him? Rho nodded again and showed me their hands. I wanted to touch them. Instead, I said, that must have taken a lot of strength. Sorry, Rho said. I forgave them immediately. Boa, I said. Boa stopped staring at my blood-stained bag. The miracle machine is no longer in operation. Rho killed Sakharov and doesn't want to talk about it. E.T. was involved. We'll go through it all. Don't tell the others. As if I could tell them. Boa almost laughed, his fake manners at full strain. Kruglov doesn't know much about Rho, does he? He knows you two are something anomalous. He says Rho has powers like a phantom. Does he think phantoms can kill? No, of course not. Then Rho is safe. I can't be sure. The others will want answers. They'll find out what we were up to and ask to see Rho, I expect. I don't think anyone knew Rho was in here, but still, you'll both have to leave. Things will get messy. The professor was a bookend. I don't know what will happen now. Everyone's going to want their money in advance, that's for sure. And you? What do I have to spend it on? What will you do? We'll see you two tomorrow. That bad? Fine. Phantoms can kill, by the way. Surely not. We'd be dead by now. Don't rule anything out. When I get back, could I have the whole story? Yeah, I'll write it or something. That's right. I got those papers from X16 out of my bag and thrust them upon Boa. I found them. It might have been a dream, I said. You better write this down, Zig. Well, looks real enough to me. And Rho strangled the professor. Miracle machine, huh? Nothing worth saying to anyone anyway. I hope you're okay, both of you. It might get better from here. I shouldn't say anything. With that, Boa locked us into the cell. You're wounded, Rho noted. Yeah, I sighed. I lay on the camp bed for a while. Rho was trying to work out what to do with my ruined jacket. You actually saw what happened, didn't you? I eventually said. Rho nodded. How are you connected? Is it E.T.? What happened? I don't really know, and neither do you, about what happened to you. We shared that experience differently. Differently?
Not anymore, though.
Yeah. Next time you should come with me.
I don't really want to.
No choice. It's too hard on my own.
I know. You should be more worried about what you've done.
I was more worried about it before, actually.
If you let people into the new zone, new things will happen.
Maybe to us, including a wish.
We should leave soon then.
I need their artifacts, for the bullets. I showed Rho my various scars. Rho helped me clean them off, then started knocking on the door for room service. It was an hour until Boa returned and got us sorted out with supplies. He lent me a glass box with a lumpy yellow ball inside. It looked like a sea mine, but soft and bouncy. It pinged off the sides of the box in a playful fashion. Rho was enraptured by it, while I hovered it over the bullet wounds. Out the invaders popped, one by one. They turned downwards, heading towards the place they were fired from. Rho snatched them up as souvenirs, which the artifact didn't approve of. The eye's lethargic gluttony nipped any mess in the bud, and I had ample painkillers on hand. In the end, I was none the worse for wear after a day of being moments from death at all times. Physically no worse, at least. We snacked on tinned mysteries, napped, myself in a drugged daze, and listened to people walking past the door all evening. It sounded like some were willing to try the road to Poliska that night, which ran out the far side of the metalworks according to our new maps. Rho and I were tempted to follow. However, we had a visit from a scientist I didn't recognize after dark, who wanted me to write down loads of details about X-16. I couldn't get away from the paperwork even as a clear sky dropout. Wasted half of the cheapest pencil I'd ever used, writing a half-accurate tale of quarter-remembered dreams. I left out the part where I killed Rho. Real Rho and I were avoiding that topic. Instead, I wrote what I thought might be true about it. I killed an alien. I killed something, that's all I really remember. And is my memory correct? I'd wager against it, same as old Zedric. The Institute guy was more interested in the giant I claimed to have slain, in particular that battering down the fence might allow its body to be recovered. I recommended that they go tonight while it was fresh, thinking it might ease Rho and I's stealthy escape. He said that they were waiting for the cats to return the next morning before anyone could approach the plant, meaning the navy-tunicked Americans. The Blinn ended up being fully booked, and there was even a stinking guy fresh from a wade through the lake who was bunked with us. He was very proud of a horrid green piece of bone he'd fished out of it. It hissed and let off steam when he pressed it against the scraps in our tins. An amazing new artifact? Hey, why not? Cheer yourself up. I excused us and decided to sleep. It was dreamless and sedate, skimming the surface of the void I'd visited, then bouncing back to the rapping of rifle barrels on the door and warning shouts. The roof was creaking and thumping under footsteps.
There was a helicopter,
Rho reported. The gangrene bone man was lying beside 4 empty vodka jugs, the bone in his hand. The bone was about 3 times the size it was before. When I shifted up to see if he was breathing, the door was bashed again, with someone telling us to come out. I said it was locked. Shouting and scurrying carried on out there until Boa opened the door.
"Nothing I could do. Sorry,"
he said. My stomach set and my hand considered the Browning. There was no space and no time. It was a Jutia, black armor head to toe, lenses for eyes, and nothing less than a good old SG-550 taking up half the space between us. "Which one of you is Rho?" he burbled. I pointed at the guy who was probably dead. "Nice try," the Jutia said, and dragged us outside. They were playing rough with the Institute guys in the hallway, even the government soldiers. No one seemed interested in fighting back. I heard a Jutia shouting at our roommate. Couldn't even rest in peace. "Gonna say anything?" I said to the pushing guy. "Outside," was the answer. Getting through the airlock ruined the momentum of this kidnapping. 2 guys in light armor and balaclavas took all our stuff. "Hey, do you know Lieutenant, Kriska?" I tried. Rho whispered Krieger, but it wasn't going to work anyway. Outside, 4 Jutias were enjoying the beautiful day. One had his face showing and smiled at me. "So you're Rho," he said. "Sure," I nodded. Rho stifled a laugh. "I heard you were younger." "I was, yesterday," I grumbled. "Stalkers, always a delight." His smile was expended. "You're under arrest," he said.